All right, welcome back, guys. Today we are going over Seneca's moral letter to Lucilius, letter 42. This is on values, and we'll jump right into this. So he says here, has a friend of yours already made you believe that he is a good man, and yet it is impossible in so short a time for one either to become good or to be known as such. Do you know what kind of man I mean when I speak of, quote, a good man? I mean one of the second grade, like your friend. For one of the first, perhaps, springs into existence, like the phoenix, only once in 500 years. And it is not surprising either that greatness develops only at long intervals. Fortune often brings into being commonplace powers which are born to please the mob, but she holds up for approval that which is extraordinary by the very fact that she make it rare. Okay, so what is he saying here? So he's saying here, okay, he's asking Lucilius about his new friend, and he's saying, has he already made you believe that he's a good man? Okay, and he's saying that it's impossible in such a short time for a person to either become good or to even be known as such, right? And so, if we look at the footnote here, it says Seneca doubtless has in mind the famous passages of Simonides, discussed by Plato. So there's this, he's quoting essentially, or he's saying it basically from this passage. Okay, and he says, he's asking, what kind of man is actually a good man, right? And he's saying like, I mean the one, of the second grade, like you think your friend is, right? Because he's saying that the first class one. All right, it's rare. It's like the phoenix. Once every 500 years, it is. And he's saying that the thing about fortune is that she makes something that is extraordinary actually rare, so that you can recognize it as such. So if something is not rare, it's probably not extraordinary. And he says here in verse 2, this man, however, of whom you speak, is still far from the state which he professes to have reached. And if he knew what it meant to be a good man, he would not yet believe himself such. Perhaps he would even despair of his ability to become good. But you say he thinks ill of evil men. Well, so do evil men themselves. And there is no worse penalty for vice than the fact that it is dissatisfied with itself and its fellows. Right? So he's saying here that, look, this guy is saying that he's good, but if he really knew what it was, he wouldn't believe that he was, okay? And he would even despair on how difficult it is to become good, right? He'd be upset by that. And so the argument, he says, well, but you say, well, he thinks ill of evil men. Well, yeah, evil people do that as well, right? And he's saying that it's, the worst penalty that happens for a vice is that you're dissatisfied with it, and everyone else who is in that vice as well. So just because you hate evil men doing evil things does not in any way make you good. In verse 3, he says, but he hates those who make an ungoverned use of great power suddenly acquired. I retort that he will do the same thing as soon as he acquires the same powers. In the case of many men, their vices, being powerless, escape notice. Although, as soon as the person in question have become satisfied with their own strength, the vices will be no less daring than those which prosperity has already disclosed. So what he's saying here is he's saying, look, okay, if you make the argument and say that he doesn't like people abusing their power, well, when he has that power, he will do the same thing. That's what's going to happen. And he says that the thing is that in many people, the vices that they have, you don't even notice them until they gain power, right? Until someone becomes rich or famous or has power, is put in a position of power, that's when you see them abuse that power, right? That's when they go on a power trip. And so it's not until they have those positions that those things become just as noticeable as the vices that they already have, right? And so this is something to keep in mind in terms of yourself and for other people, is that when, I think of money as a multiplier, right? It multiplies what you already are. It doesn't make you anything different. And so if you say that money corrupts people, it's not that money corrupts people. It's that it brings out the corruption that is in them. They were already corrupt. They just didn't have the means to do it, right? And so that's the thing you really have to think about, is that when you see someone and you're judging their character, you have to be cautious of, if they had the power, if they had the ability, what would they do? And you yourself as well, right? What would you do, right? You might judge a person and someone who is in power and you see abusing that power, but would you not do the same thing? Maybe not, but maybe so. You'll never know until you have it, right? In verse 4, he says, these men simply lack the means whereby they may unfold their wickedness. Similarly, one can handle even a poisonous snake while it is stiff with cold. The poison is not lacking. It is merely numbed into inaction. In the case of many men, their cruelty, ambition, and indulgence only lack the favor of fortune to make them dare crimes that would match the worst. That their wishes are the same, you will in a moment discover. In this way, give them power equal to their wishes. Okay, so what he's saying here is he's saying, look, it's basically what we just said. Most men lack the power in order to actually unfold their wickedness, right? He's saying you can handle a poisonous snake when it's really cold, when it can't move because they're cold-blooded, right? So if it's really cold outside, a snake's not going to be able to move or do anything, right? And so the poison's still there. It's just because of the cold. And so it's the same thing with a lot of men, right? A lot of people, they have their cruelty and ambition and indulgence. It's just hidden because they haven't been given the opportunity in order to exercise that. And when they do that have that opportunity, then you'll see that what will actually happen. That's where, their true nature comes out. Do you remember how, when you declared that a certain person was under your influence, I pronounced him fickle and a bird of passage, and said that you held him not by the foot, but merely by a wing? Was I mistaken? You grasped him only by a feather. He left it in your hands and escaped. You know what an exhibition he afterwards made of himself before you. How many of the things he attempted were to recoil upon his head. He did not see that in endangering others, he was tottering to his own downfall. He did not reflect how burdensome were the objects which he was bent upon attaining, even if they were not superfluous. So he's saying, look, do you remember when I told you about this other guy? All right. And I told you he's fickle. Okay. He's a person that will just disappear and is not, he doesn't have your back. Right. He's like, was I mistaken? Right. You found out, right. When he left, when he, left your side and then started causing trouble and making trouble for other people. Right. That's the thing. Right. Is that a person like that, they don't see that the harm that they're causing others is going to come back to them. Right. They don't think about how the things that they're so bent on trying to achieve or get that these objects will actually be burdensome to them. Okay, even if they're not superfluous, as he's saying here. In verse 6, he says, therefore, with regard to the objects which we pursue and for which we strive with great effort, we should note this truth. Either there is nothing desirable in them, or the undesirable is preponderant. Some objects are superfluous. Others are not worth the price we pay for them. But we do not see this clearly we regard things as free gifts when they really cost us very dear, right? So he's saying here, so he's kind of transitioned into the idea of these objects, of what we actually pursue. And he says that, we spend a lot of effort trying to go after these things. And the truth of it is this, is either they're not actually desirable. There's nothing desirable in them, or the undesirable is preponderant. So the undesirable part hasn't shown up yet. Okay. And he says some of the things are superfluous. Okay. But the other things are not even worth the price that we pay for them. We pay this high price, but is it worth it? If you go and you buy a brand new car, right? At first it's nice and whatnot, but if you spend $40,000 on a car instead of $10,000 on a car, that extra $30,000, is it really worth it? Do you really feel that, or does it? Do you realize that it's not really worth the price that you paid to have it be brand new, right? In verse 7, he says, our stupidity may be clearly proved by the fact that we hold that buying refers only to the objects for which we pay cash, and we regard as free gifts the things which we spend our very selves. These we should refuse to buy if we were compelled to give in payment for them our house or some attractive or profitable estate, but we are eager to attain them at the cost of anxiety, of danger, and of lost honor, personal freedom, and time. And so true it is that each man regards nothing as cheaper than himself. So here he's making a really important point here. He said in the previous verse as well that we regard things as free gifts when they really cost us very dear. And he's going into the point here by saying that, look, we think this, and it's dumb. We think that buying is only when we pay money for a thing, okay? But the things that we spend ourselves on are our effort, that costs us anxiety, danger, loss of honor, loss of personal freedom. We think that those things are free because we only actually attach a price to the things that we actually have to pay hard-earned cash for, and we don't realize that if we had to give some kind of high payment for some of the things that we think are free, we wouldn't take them. But in reality, we are making a high payment. In fact, the worst kind of payment, because he says that it's that each man regards nothing as cheaper than himself, right? So how much are you unwilling to part with money, but you are willing to part with your peace? It's silly. So sometimes it comes up in a circumstance where I either have to pay by my peace or money, and I just pay the money, right? Even when someone has unjustly charged me, many times it's not worth calling them up. It's not worth trying to go and get my money back or whatever it is, or because it's going to disturb my peace. It's so much easier to just, okay, I'll just pay this bill. Now, obviously, if it's a huge amount and it's going to cause me more harm in that case, then I would pursue it. But there's many cases where it doesn't make sense. It's not worth it because we don't regard the price of our own sanity and the other things, right? In verse 8, he says, "Let's therefore act in all our plans and conduct, just as we are accustomed to act whenever we approach a huckster who has certain wares for sale. Let us see how much we must pay for that which we crave. Very often, the things that cost nothing cost us the most heavily. I can show you many objects, the quest and acquisition of which have wrested freedom from our hands. We should belong to ourselves if only these things did not belong to us." Right? So what he's saying is that there's a lot of things in life that you pursue that cost you your freedom, your very freedom. Right? And so if you were smart, you would approach everything that you're going after with the eyes of someone who's looking at a huckster that's trying to sell them and say, well, is this really worth the price? Right? Really consider what is the actual price, not the physical price in terms of money, but the price in terms of your time and in terms of your sanity, in terms of potentially your honor or how you'll look and your personal freedom. Right? Will this take time from you? Right? And if you really think about things in that context, you might make some different decisions. He says here in verse 9, "I would therefore have you reflect thus, not only when it is a question of gain, but also when it is a question of loss. Quote, this object is bound to perish. Yes, it was a mere extra. You will live without it just as easily as you have lived before. If you have possessed it for a long time, you will lose it after you have had your fill of it. If you have not possessed it long, then you will lose it before you have become wedded to it. You will have less money, yes, and less trouble." So what he's saying here is he's saying, look, here's another argument, all right? Think about it this way. Okay, it's not just a question of what you're going to gain from getting this thing, but it's loss. Okay, whatever you get, it's bound to perish. Okay, and you're going to live without it just as easily as you lived before, right? If you didn't have it now and you didn't need it now, you're not going to need it. He said, and if you've got it for a long time, then you're going to lose it after you've had your fill of it. So it'll have already been worthless to you anyway. And if you haven't had it for a long time, then you'll lose it before it becomes something really valuable to you, right? He says, yeah, you're going to have less money and less trouble. So if you getting more things, one of those things is money, will give you more trouble, more money, more problems, right? In verse 10, he says, "Less influence, yes, and less envy. Look about you and note the things that drive us mad, which we lose with the flood of tears. You will perceive that it's not the loss that troubles us with the reference to these things, but a notion of loss. No one feels that they have been lost, but his mind tells him that it has been so. He that owns himself has lost nothing, but how few men are blessed with ownership of self. Farewell." Right? So what he's saying here is he's saying don't take anything that is going to have a hold on you, right? Because that's when you lose yourself, right? If you feel like you can't live without this thing, if you feel like you have to keep this thing, or you have this desire for this thing, or you have to protect this thing, then it will have this hold on you, right? And he says that if you look at the things that drive you mad, okay, and that you get upset when you lose, you'll see that it's not the actual loss that troubles you. Okay, but it's the notion of the loss. It's the idea of losing it, right? If I gave you $1 million tomorrow, all right, and then I took it away, you would be upset that I took it away. Now, does it matter because you had it one day and then you didn't have it another day? Like you didn't have it before. It shouldn't matter to you, right? You should be like, okay, well, I didn't have $1 million, and someone gave, let's say that the bank's like, oh, we made a mistake and we owe you $1 million, and then they call back the next day and like, actually, we made a mistake on the mistake. There was no mistake. We don't owe you $1 million. So we're moving it back to from your account. You'd probably be upset. But again, why should you be upset? And the reason why is because it's not the actual loss. It's the notion of loss. It's the idea that you had something and now you've lost it, right? It's not the thing itself. All right. And that is it for today. We'll see you tomorrow.